I still remember the sting of those words, sharp enough to scrape across the inside of my skull even now. Your training program is a waste of company resources, and frankly, so are you. The CEO said it without looking at me. No emotion. No hesitation, just a verdict he believed. I was too weak to challenge. He thought firing me would be the end of it. He had no idea that the woman he dismissed so casually had spent years studying every crack in his empire, every lie he layered under polished statements. Every irregular number he thought nobody noticed. Every shell company he used like a hidden drawer, he didn't. No, I had already been building my own plan. Quietly, patiently, exactly. He didn't know I was the one person in the entire company who understood the structure of his acquisitions better than he did. He didn't know I kept copies of documents he assumed were lost, shredded, or altered. He didn't know I had the kind of memory that doesn't forget patterns. Even the faint ones, especially the faint ones. But before I tell you how I destroyed him, before I tell you how I turned that humiliating meeting into the moment I began owning not just his company but the fate of his entire board, I need to tell you how it started. I need to tell you how a simple internal training program and initiative meant to protect junior analysts from burnout became the reason he pulled the trigger on his own downfall. Because the truth is, he didn't fire me for wasted spending. He fired me because he was terrified I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see. Something inside the quarterly roll-up thing inside the M and pipeline. Something buried so deeply that even the auditors didn't know which drawer to open, and he was right to be terrified. The day he walked me out of the office, smiling that thin smile of a man who thinks he's untouchable, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't even look back at the glass building where I had spent 7 years of my life. Instead, I watched his reflection in the mirrored door as it closed between us. And I felt something strange, something calm and sharp settling inside me. Not rage, not bitterness, something colder, more precise. He had stolen my job. I was going to take his legacy. What he didn't know was that firing me triggered a clause in a contract he forgot existed. A clause he signed himself. A clause that would give me the leverage to begin the quiet takeover he never saw coming. By the time he realized what I had done, by the time he understood the meaning behind the numbers I leaked, the meetings I orchestrated, the allies I turned, it was already too late. He fired me for training waste. But waste was never the problem. His arrogance was. And I was about to turn that arrogance into the weapon that ended him. When I first joined Halden and Pierce Capital, I wasn't the woman who could take down a CEO. I was just a tired 26-year-old analyst who drank too much burnt coffee and believed hard work would eventually be rewarded. I came from mergers and acquisitions, long nights, impossible deadlines, and a culture that worshipped exhaustion as loyalty, but I was different from most analysts. While others focused on climbing, I paid attention to structure, patterns, the hidden logic behind decisions others dismissed as above their pay grade. And over the years, I became the quiet backbone of the firm's integration team, the person who understood the messy aftermath of every acquisition. We bought companies like they were poker chips. And I learned every stitch of the game. By my 5th year, I wasn't just an analyst anymore. I was the architect of our internal training program, system designed to prevent junior staff from burning out and making costly mistakes in due diligence. Ironically, that program saved the firm millions in a single year. I thought that mattered. I thought the CEO, Marcus Halle, respected results, but Marcus didn't care about results unless they benefited him personally. He was the kind of leader who smiled like a politician and talked like everything was a negotiation. To him, every initiative was either a threat to his control or a tool he could weaponize. My training program became a threat the moment it forced transparency. Junior staff started catching inconsistencies. They started asking questions. They started noticing discrepancies in the valuation models that supposedly came directly from executive leadership. Those mistakes weren't mistakes. They were cover dash-ups. And Marcus knew it. I didn't understand the danger until the day I found a set of altered projections inside an acquisition folder, projections that didn't match the original documents I reviewed 6 months earlier. Someone at the top had changed them. Someone with authority. Someone with access. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to understand the pattern before speaking. That was always my instinct: observe first, move later. But Marcus noticed my silence. And he mistook it for ignorance. The more I watched, the more I realized he was using acquisitions as a shell game, moving inflated valuations from one deal to cover the shortcomings of another. A quiet house of cards hidden beneath confident statements and polished quarterly presentations. One night, I stayed in the office past midnight, alone with spreadsheets, contracts, and the sinking truth. I realized something terrifying. If this ever collapsed, the analysts would be blamed. The managers would be blamed, everyone except the man actually responsible and my training program. It was making the collapse harder to hide. That was the beginning of the end. Looking back now, I understand why he fired me. I had become the only employee in the company who could see the real blueprint of his empire, and he needed that blueprint buried. But what he didn't know, what he could never have anticipated, was that I had already taken precautions, copies, notes, evidence, patterns mapped out like a silent constellation. Only I understood. He thought he removed a problem. What he actually did was unleash someone with nothing left to lose, and every detail left to expose. The real conflict didn't begin with the firing. It started long before. On a quiet Tuesday morning, when the air in the office smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink, and the junior analysts were whispering about a missing valuation file from the Crestview acquisition. Crestview wasn't just any acquisition. It was Marcus Hale's trophy deal, an overpriced gamble wrapped in glossy press releases and forced enthusiasm. Everyone on the M&A team had concerns about its numbers, but Marcus dismissed them with polished confidence and forced optimism. We all knew what that meant. The deal wasn't about value. It was about Marcus proving a point to the board. That morning, one of the juniors, Emily, came to me with shaking hands. "I can't find the version you approved," she whispered. "There's a new one in the drive, but the numbers are different." Different was an understatement. Someone had inflated revenue projections by nearly 40% and erased 2 red flags the diligence team had documented. The version she found made the acquisition look clean, safe, profitable. The real version didn't. I checked the metadata. The file had been modified by an account with executive privileges. One of only 3 people in the company had that kind of access. And Marcus was one of them. Emily looked at me like she wanted permission to panic. I gave her the safest advice I could: say nothing, send no email, touch nothing else. But silence carries weight in a company like ours, and silence attracts attention. 2 hours later, Marcus called an impromptu executive meeting. His tone was chipper. Too chipper, like someone rehearsing confidence. He paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, talking about streamlining operations, cutting inefficiencies, and promoting alignment from top to bottom. Then he turned to me. "I'm concerned," he said, "that certain departments are creating unnecessary confusion through over-documentation, particularly the training program." My chest tightened. He wasn't talking about documentation. He was talking about evidence. He announced a temporary suspension of the training initiative until further review, but the message behind his words was clear. I was getting too close. From that moment, tension spread through the office like a slow leak. The juniors grew quieter. Directors started avoiding eye contact. Managers whispered in hallways. People could feel something shifting, even if they couldn't see the shape of it. Meanwhile, I continued to track the discrepancies quietly, one deal at a time, one spreadsheet at a time, one late night dive into metadata at a time. And the more I found, the clearer the pattern became. Marcus wasn't fixing numbers. He was orchestrating them. Some valuations were inflated, some losses were buried, some projections were Edited after board approvals. And it wasn't sloppy, it was intentional. I started to sense eyes on me. Conversations paused when I walked by. Manages grew colder, shorter, sharper. Marcus, on the other hand, became overly polite, dangerously polite, the way a predator circles. Just before striking, I told myself to keep calm. To stay quiet. To collect every thread before pulling. The rope tight, but the conflict escalated the moment I made a single mistake. One tiny slip Marcus was waiting for. I forgot to log out of my workstation, and when I returned from a meeting, my screen was open. But something on the desk was different. My notebook shifted half an inch. Someone had been reading it. Someone knew exactly what I was tracking, and from that moment, the firing became inevitable. The betrayal didn't explode all at once. It unfolded quietly, like a slow leak in a sealed rumen scene, unnoticed, until the air became too thin to breathe. It began 3 days after I found my notebook shifted on my desk. Marcus summoned me to the executive floor. No warning. No agenda. Just a calendar invite labeled Performance Alignment Discussion. The kind of label HR uses when they're preparing a body for burial. When I walked into the conference room, it was already full. HR. Legal. Marcus at the head of the table, leaning back like a king watching an execution he'd already signed off on. He didn't smile this time. He didn't need to. Let's get straight to it, he said, folding his hands like he was doing me a favor. Concerns have been raised about your conduct, your documentation practices, and the unnecessary strain your training program is creating on productivity. My heartbeat slowed to a cold, steady rhythm. This wasn't a discussion. This was a sentence. I kept my voice calm. What concerns specifically? HR cleared her throat, eyes avoiding mine. We received reports that you've accessed confidential financial documents unrelated to your role. There it was, the false confession, the perfect trap. I looked directly at Marcus. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He just watched me with that expression of manufactured disappointment at performance. He could probably do in his sleep. I accessed files required for integration, I said. The same files I've always worked on. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was offering wisdom rather than poison. Our system logs say otherwise. A lie, a bold, calculated lie. But unless I wanted to reveal the evidence I collected, I couldn't prove it. The trap tightened. Additionally, HR continued, we found discrepancies in the training budget, overspending, duplicate invoices, missing approvals. My stomach dropped. Not because the accusation was true, it wasn't, but because I finally understood how deep his betrayal went. He had forged the numbers. He had set the budget. Inconsistencies. He had created the paper trail. He didn't just fire me. He framed me. Effective immediately, HR said softly. Your employment is terminated. I felt the room tilt. Not from shock, but from clarity. The kind of clarity that hits when you realize someone has been planning your downfall far longer than you suspected. Marcus stood. He walked around the table slowly, stopping just inches from me. He lowered his voice so only I could hear. You're smart, he murmured. Too smart. And people like you eventually get curious and dangerous. His breath carried the faint scent of mint and arrogance. Consider this mercy.
He whispered. Mercy. He called it mercy. Security walked me out. My badge was deactivated before.
I reached the elevator. Colleagues stared in stunned silence. Some sympathetic, some relieved it wasn't them, most too afraid to speak. But the true betrayal wasn't the firing. It wasn't even the false accusations. It came the moment I stepped outside into the cold breeze and checked my personal email. There, waiting like a knife slipped under a door, was a message from my landlord. Your lease will not be renewed. Please vacate within 30 days. Marcus had pulled strings. He wasn't just removing me from the company. He was erasing stability from my life, cutting every safety net he thought I relied on. He underestimated me again. Because inside my bag, protected by layers of folders, notebooks, and encrypted drives, was everything he feared I had. The altered projections, the forged valuation trails, the acquisition, patterns. The shell entities. The emails he thought. He deleted. The metadata he thought nobody would check. He believed he was burying me with his betrayal. He didn't realize he had just proven how terrified he truly was. And nothing fuels revenge like the betrayal of a man who thinks he's untouchable. Revenge is never loud at the beginning. It starts quietly like the soft click of a lock you finally understand how to pick. The night after I was fired, I spread every document across my small apartment floor. Projection trails, valuation edits, audit gaps, shell company ledgers, integration notes, internal memos, every piece Marcus thought I had forgotten. I didn't sleep. I mapped patterns until dawn. And somewhere between the altered revenue schedules and the missing due diligence remarks, the plan formed not out of anger, but out of precision. This wasn't going to be a public scandal. Not at first. Marcus thrived under attention.
He performed under fire. If I exposed him too early, he would spin it, twist it, weaponize it.
And walk away clean. No. My plan required silence. Patience. And pressure in the places he never expected. Step 1. Identify the cracks. The board members were loyal to Marcus on the surface. But loyalty in corporate life is usually conditional. I studied each executive's pressure points, their investment portfolios, their voting histories, their risk tolerance. I learned who feared bad press, who feared losing bonuses, who feared regulatory attention. I didn't need all of them. Just three cracks in the marble. Step 2. Use Marcus's arrogance against him. He had forgotten about the clause buried in the training program's original approval contract, a clause he signed without reading fully. A clause granting me a percentage-based ownership of the intellectual framework if the program were terminated without documented cause. He terminated it during my firing meeting. On record. In front of HR. In front of legal. Meaning? I was legally owed equity. Small, yes, but equity is power. Equity is access. Equity is a wedge. I filed my claim quietly. No email. No drama. Just a certified letter to the board's general counsel, forcing the company to acknowledge my rights in writing. The moment they did, I became a shareholder. Not large enough to make noise, but large enough to request documents through legal channels. Step 3. Gather deeper evidence, the kind that couldn't be dismissed as oversight or error. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a timeline of Marcus's manipulations, valuations altered after board approval timestamps, losses moved into subsidiaries that only existed on paper, expenses reclassified to hide personal spending, acquisition profits inflated, quarterly to trigger executive bonuses. Each piece was simple. Together, they were damning. Step 4. Find allies who didn't know they were allies. Whistleblowing is dangerous when done alone, but if you align incentives correctly, people become helpful without realizing they're part of a grander design. A junior accountant hungry for recognition. A compliance officer exhausted by leadership's secrecy. A director who secretly feared her name might be dragged down with Marcus's. I didn't tell them my plan. I simply asked the right questions. Let them connect the dots themselves. Let them feel like they were uncovering the truth, because people fight harder for discoveries they believe are their own. Step 5. Trigger the quiet collapse. I knew Marcus. S weakness wasn't the board. It wasn't investors. It wasn't even the media. It was the regulators. He lived in terror of them, because regulators don't negotiate. They dig. So I drafted an anonymous report, not dramatic, not accusatory, just precise enough to spark mandatory inquiry. A single sentence did most of the work. The revenue projections used for the Crestview acquisition do not match the version approved by the board. Regulators would request files. Files would contradict each other. Contradictions would force internal review. Review would expose individualized edits. Edits would point to executive access. Pressure would build. And Marcus? He would think it was coming from inside. Not from me. Step 6. Set the stage for the kill. Once the board sensed even a whisper of regulatory attention, they would panic. Not for me. Not for the company. For themselves. Their bonuses. Their reputations. Their careers. They would turn on Marcus the moment he became a liability. All I had to do was give them enough proof to justify it. Just enough to let them believe they were making a smart, strategic decision. I didn't need to destroy Marcus. He would destroy himself the moment pressure hit the right bone. And I knew exactly where to press. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was architecture. A downfall designed piece by piece. And the best part? He still thought he won. Climaxes in corporate warfare don't look like explosions. They look like silence heavy, unnatural silence right before the world begins to tilt. It started on a Wednesday morning. Marcus strolled into the firm as if nothing in the world could touch him. Suit pressed, smile polished, the gait of a man whose ego walked a few steps ahead of his body. He had no idea the first domino had already fallen. At 9:12 a.m. The board received the regulator's preliminary inquiry. At 9:17 a.m. They received my anonymous evidence package clean. Chronological, irrefutable. At 9:26 a.m. The general counsel called for an emergency closed-door meeting. By 10:05 a.m. Marcus was still blissfully unaware, sipping espresso like he owned the air. I watched from a coffee shop across the street. My laptop open, my encrypted trackers monitoring email pings and meeting room badge swipes. I knew every move happening inside that building. I knew which board members were panicking earliest. I knew who was blaming whom. I knew who tried to call Marcus, and who stopped themselves at the last second. He walked into the boardroom. At 10:18 a.m. Shoulders squared, expression easy. He didn't stay long. 10 minutes later, the door flew open. Marcus came out pale beneath his tan. The confident, veneer cracking like old paint. He didn't sit, he didn't speak to anyone. He went straight to the glass office his assistant guarded, slammed the door, and lowered the blinds. That was the moment he understood the truth. Not who betrayed him, he wasn't there yet, but that someone had pierced his armor. The next 2 hours were a slow-motion freefall. 11:02. A.M. Regulators officially requested the Crestview acquisition files. 11:15. A.M. The versions didn't match. 11:18. A.M. The metadata exposed when the files had been altered, and by whom? 11:39 a.m. A board member called legal and whispered, "We cannot protect him." 12:04 p. Marcus's assistant left the building in tears. 12:26 p.m. He requested a private meeting with the general counsel. Denied. 12:40 p.m. The board demanded Marcus step aside, temporarily pending investigation, a request that is never temporary. 12:43 p.m. He refused. 12:45 p.m. He was locked out of the shared drive. The downfall wasn't loud. It was clinical. Like a structure collapsing from within. At 1 p.m. I finally walked toward the building, not to go inside, but to stand across the street and witness the moment I had built with my own hands. The glass doors burst open. Marcus stepped out. Surrounded by HR and security, his face flushed with disbelief and fury. He wasn't handcuffed. This wasn't a movie. But there was a different kind of restraint in his expression. The realization that his power had evaporated. Across the street, I stood still, and then it happened. He saw me. Just for a second, his eyes locked onto mine with the recognition of a man who finally understands the shape of the weapon that pierced him. He didn't say a word he didn't need to. His expression spoke every sentence his pride refused to form.
It was you. You planned this. You buried me quietly. And
I never saw it coming. The crowd around him blurred. The city noise dimmed. Time slowed into something cinematic and deliberate. I didn't smile. Not because I didn't want to, but because victory, real victory, doesn't require theatrics. It is felt, not displayed. It hums under the skin. It thrums in the bones. Security escorted Marcus into a black company sedan, the same sedan he used to ride with arrogance, now carrying him to a board interrogation that would end his career. But the climax wasn't complete until the final call. At 1:28 p.m. My phone buzzed, a private number, a voice I recognized, the chairwoman of the board. "We reviewed your equity claim," she said. "And after today's events, we believe you deserve a larger role in the company's recovery." A pause. "Would you consider returning under very different terms?" Different terms. Ownership. Control. Authority. A seat at the table Marcus once gatekept with iron confidence. I knew this moment would come. I'd build a staircase they were now inviting me to climb. I took a breath that tasted like Victory and smoke. Yes, I said softly. But we do it my way. The downfall was complete. The empire Marcus built on lies didn't burn. It collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance and under the quiet precision of the woman he tried to erase. Returning to the company didn't feel like walking back into an old life. It felt like stepping into a space I had once been. Denied now reshaped by the echoes of everything that had collapsed. The boardroom was quieter when I entered, colder, stripped of Marcus's bravado and rehearsed confidence. The executives sat straighter. Their voices softened. Their questions carried less arrogance and more caution, as if they finally understood the cost of underestimating the wrong person. I didn't return as an employee. I returned as a shareholder, an advisor, and eventually after the board's unanimous vote, the interim leader of the division Marcus once controlled, walking into his old office felt surreal. The blinds were open. The shelves were half empty. His nameplate was gone. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like reclamation. My first act wasn't punishment. It was correction. I rebuilt the training program he tried to kill, this time with clear reporting lines, board oversight, and protections that no executive could undermine. The juniors he once intimidated now stood taller, relieved to breathe in a space no longer suffocating. The acquisitions team worked differently too: more transparency, more accountability, fewer whispered fears. And as the regulators completed their review, it became clear the company wouldn't collapse. It would recover, stronger, cleaner, and subtly, under my quiet direction. As for Marcus, his downfall continued like a slow echo. He lost his title, his severance froze, his reputation fractured beyond repair, and the industry he once dominated turned its back on him. One unreturned phone call at a time. I didn't chase news about him. I didn't need to. Whatever storm he faced now was of his own making. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in the glass walls of the office, calm, steady, unrecognizable from the version of myself who once thought survival meant staying silent. Silence had been his weapon. Now it was mine, wielded with purpose. Not fear. The company wasn't perfect, but it was no longer his kingdom, and the space he once guarded like a throne had become the arena where I reclaimed everything he tried to strip away. Not by destroying the company, but by owning it. Power doesn't come from titles, offices, or the people who try to control your place in the room. It comes from knowing your worth so deeply that no one can erase it, not with lies, not with manipulation, not with betrayal. Marcus thought firing me would end my story. Instead, it exposed his own. Revenge wasn't about watching him fall. It was about rising into the life he tried to steal, using the truth as the force he never expected. In the end, justice wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was quiet, deliberate, and earned. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply taking back what was yours all along and building something stronger in the ruins of what someone else tried to destroy.